Welcome to the deep dive. This is where you bring us a stack of sources and, well, we jump in headfirst to uncover the most important insights and maybe some surprising facts. Today, you've handed us material about a really fascinating moment in British monetary history, the big replacement of copper coins with bronze back in the 1860s.
That's right. And it sounds, pretty straightforward, just changing your pocket money. But as we'll see from these sources you brought, it was actually a massive undertaking.
Massive. How?
Well, it involved high politics, some real design battles, and considerable logistical challenges. So our goal here is to unpack these sources with you, understand why this change was, frankly, desperately needed, and, exactly what it took to pull it off.
And I suspect by the end of this deep dive, you'll probably never look at a penny or a half penny the same way again. Because the state of the old copper coinage by the late 1850s, it sounds like it was, well, chaos.
Oh, it was a well-documented chaos, yes. The sources make it very clear that the condition of British copper coins, pennies, half pennies, farthings, mainly, had become, well, widely unacceptable.
How bad are we talking? Just like worn in dirt?
Oh, much worse than that.
No.
For a start, they were just incredibly cumbersome. Think about Matthew Boulton's famous 1797 penny, the cartwheel penny. It weighed a full ounce.
An ounce for one penny?
A full ounce, yeah. That's heavier than a whole handful of modern coins. And even the later ones, struck to a slightly lighter standard, still meant that just 3 new pennies weighed 2 ounces.
Wow.
Or 6 half pennies or 12 farthings, same thing, 2 ounces. So carrying even a small amount of change was physically, a burden.
Okay, so they were heavy, that's one thing. But were there other problems?
Oh, definitely. Copper, see, it's quite a soft metal. So these coins wore down really badly in circulation.
Right.
They also oxidized, turned dark, became difficult to read. And a huge issue was just the sheer variety of coins still floating around. Different standards had been used over the years. And really worn coins could easily be mistaken for others. Like a large worn-out half penny might look like a small penny, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then on top of all that, you had Irish copper coins, which had been made legal tender in Great Britain, adding another layer of confusion.
Sounds like a bit of a nightmare for shopkeepers and, well, everyone.
It really was. And it wasn't just wear and confusion. Counterfeits were apparently quite common.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And sometimes foreign coins slipped through.
Yeah.
And people actually abused the coins themselves, stamping them with adverts, piercing holes in them, or even marking them with vulgar names or initials. The sources mention that specifically.
Yeah. There's one source here, Chambers Edinburgh Journal from 1860. It has this incredibly vivid description. It talks about getting a shilling's worth of halfpence.
Ah, I know the one.
And it calls them a bruised, battered, ill-matched, ill-conditioned lot. Large and small, thick and thin, old and new, pierced with holes, dented and scarred. Disfigured by advertising, placing vulgar names or initials where they are least to be desired.
That quote just sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? It really wasn't just about the money. It was the physical state, the abuse of these everyday objects.
Yeah.
And as if all those practical problems weren't enough, the portrait of Queen Victoria on the coins was apparently 20 years out of date. Still showed her as a young woman.
Okay. The need for change seems pretty undeniable. How did that actually get translated into government action?
Well, the sorry state of the coinage was officially confirmed by surveys. They did these in 1856 and 1857.
Right.
And these surveys were connected to the Royal Commission on Decimal Coinage. Now, that commission didn't actually recommend going decimal right then.
Okay.
But its findings really highlighted that if Britain ever wanted to reform its money, decimalization, or anything else, replacing the terrible copper coins would have to be the first step.
So the problem was officially on the radar, linked to potential future reforms.
But
who actually took the lead on pushing for this change, the bronze coinage?
that really comes down to 2 key figures mentioned in our sources. First, Thomas Graham. He'd recently become the master of the mint.
Okay.
And second, the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, William Gladstone.
Ah, Gladstone.
Graham seems to have been the main driving force here. He persuaded Gladstone that the copper coinage absolutely had to be replaced, whether decimalization happened soon or, not at all.
So Graham convinced Gladstone. What was their actual plan?
Their decision, the core idea, was to replace the old copper with new coins made of bronze. These would be smaller, lighter, and crucially, much more durable.
Why bronze specifically?
Well, bronze is an alloy, mostly copper, but with tin and zinc added, and that makes it significantly harder than pure copper.
I see.
So the new coins would stand up to wear and tear much, much better. Plus, the Royal Mint wasn't going in completely blind. They'd actually had some recent, albeit smaller scale, experience striking bronze coins for places like Nova Scotia and the province of Canada.
Ah, so they had a bit of a test run, sort of?
Exactly. It wasn't entirely new territory for them.
And it sounds like this project was quite a significant thing for Graham personally.
It really seems so. There's a lovely quote in the sources from a letter Graham wrote to his sister. He talks about his delight at being taken into council by the government and to be talking over affairs of state with the Chancellor of the Exchequer over a parlor fire in Downing Street. It gives you a nice little glimpse of the human side behind these big policy decisions.
That's great. So the decision's made, bronze it is. What were the immediate next steps to, kick things off?
Gladstone moved pretty quickly on the funding front. In August 1859, he got Parliament to approve £10,000 for preliminary expenses.
£10,000? Was that a lot then?
Oh, yes. He'd actually asked for £50,000 initially, but even £10,000 was a very substantial sum. Our sources note it's equivalent to over $1.2 million today.
Wow. Okay. So the money's there.
Well, the initial money. And alongside that, they passed legislation that same month, August 59, to extend forgery laws to cover coins made of mixed metals, like the new bronze ones would be.
Makes sense. Got to protect the new currency.
Exactly. Need the same legal protections.
So who actually got the job of designing these crucial new coins? Was there a big public competition, like for stamps or something?
You might think so, and apparently some people argued for it. But no, the job went directly to the Royal Mint's own engraver, a man named Leonard Charles Wyon.
Wyon.
Yeah, he was already working on some patterned coins, experimenting basically, and it seems Gladstone was happy enough with his early work to just give him the commission.
How did the press react? Were people excited about getting new coins?
There was definitely anticipation. You see comments in publications like the Literary Gazette hoping the new coins would be, quote, a credit to the country.
Right.
And they specifically mentioned hoping for a portrait of the Queen that was more matronly, reflecting her actual age. She was a grandmother by then rather than the outdated young image on the old coppers. The Mechanics magazine echoed that, saying they hoped the coins would tell the truth.
A desire for realism. What specific design elements was Wyon told he had to include?
Well, the core instructions are pretty standard. Queen Victoria on the obverse, the head side, and Britannia on the reverse, the tail side.
Britannia? Was she always on the copper coins?
Pretty much, yes, since the time of Charles II in the late 17th century. And according to one numismatic historian cited here, removing Britannia would have been seen as controversial, like suggesting Britain no longer ruled the waves. So she was essential.
Britannia was non-negotiable then. How involved was Queen Victoria herself in all this? Did she just approve the final design?
Oh, much more involved than that, apparently.
Oh.
The sources say she actively modeled for Wyon multiple times.
Really? Sat for the coin portrait?
Yes. And she had very clear views on how she wanted to look, and her feedback actually caused significant delays in the whole process.
How so?
Well, Wyon had to keep traveling to her various residences. Osborne House, Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle are mentioned just to show her patterns and get her comments.
That must have slowed things down.
It certainly seems to have. There was definitely impatience bubbling up in Parliament and the press about the delays. An MP named William Ewart actually asked about it in the House of Commons.
And what did Gladstone say?
Gladstone apparently gave this rather amusing reply, blaming the delay on a mysterious secret of art.
Huh. A political answer.
Indeed. Which led the Mechanics magazine to publish this rather exasperated piece, expressing astonishment that designing just 3 coins could take 6 months, and suggesting, again, that a public competition might have been quicker.
It does sound like the artistic process, especially with royal input, was clashing a bit with the need to get these coins out.
Absolutely. But amidst all that, there was one particular design detail that caused this, unexpected controversy, something tiny, about the writing on the coin.
Oh, yes, I saw notes on this. The Brit versus Brit thing.
Exactly. The great Brit versus Brit debate. It's a fantastic little historical rabbit hole that our sources bring up.
Okay, lay it out for us. What was the issue?
Right. The inscription required around the Queen's head on the obverse was Victoria Digi Britannia. Reg FD.
Which means?
It's Latin. Abbreviations for Victoria Dei Gratia Britanniarum Regina Fidei Defensor. So, Victoria, by the grace of God, Queen of the Britons, Defender of the Faith.
Got it.
Now, Wyon, the engraver, had a space problem. Fitting all that text around the portrait was tight. He especially needed to squeeze in FD for Defender of the Faith. To do that, he needed to shorten Britannia, which itself was already an abbreviation for the plural Latin word Britanniarum, meaning of the Britons.
Right, so he had to abbreviate an abbreviation. What did he suggest?
His initial proposal, his first patterns, used Brit. Seems logical enough, right? Just chop off the end.
Yeah.
However, William Gladstone, the Chancellor, who was also a serious classical scholar,
The plot thickens.
he stepped in. He absolutely insisted it had to be Brit, with 2 T's.
2 T's. What?
Gladstone's argument was rooted in classical Latin grammar. He maintained, and apparently consulted others like Edward Hawkins at the British Museum, who agreed, that the standard convention for abbreviating a plural Latin noun like Britanniarum is to double the final consonant of the abbreviation. So it had to be Brit, not Brit.
So the Chancellor of the Exchequer is literally correcting the Mint's chief engraver on points of Latin grammar for a coin.
Precisely. But it wasn't just, academic showing off. Gladstone was apparently very mindful of the huge public backlash that had happened just over 10 years earlier in 1849.
What happened then?
They issued a new coin, the florin, and they left off the DG, the De Gratia, by the grace of God. It got nicknamed the Godless Florin and caused an absolute uproar.
I see.
So Gladstone was determined not to have any kind of similar controversy about perceived errors or omissions in the Queen's titles on this new coinage. Getting the Latin abbreviation technically correct by classical standards was also politically safer.
So Brits it was, for grammatical accuracy and political caution.
That was the decision, although frustratingly for those waiting, even after the Brit change was made, the Queen still requested more alterations to her portrait, causing yet more delays.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Yeah, there's a diary entry from Wyon in July 1860 quoted here, saying, "Bad news today. The Queen wishes the portraits on the new copper sick coins to be altered." You could almost hear his sigh.
Poor Wyon. It really seems the Queen's artistic eye was the main bottleneck. So, after all that delay and grammatical debate, when did the public finally get these new bronze coins?
They started entering circulation on November 26, 1860. Though, interestingly, they weren't officially proclaimed as legal tender until a bit later, December 17th.
Okay. And what was the reaction? Did people notice the Brit?
Oh, they noticed. A lot of the immediate public comment and certainly the press coverage zoomed right back in on that Brit abbreviation.
Really? Even after Gladstone's reasoning?
Yep. Rumors started swirling that it was actually a mistake by the Mint and the coins would have to be recalled. The whole debate played out in the pages of the Times, and it was discussed by groups like the Numismatic Society of London, the coin experts and collectors.
So Gladstone tried to avoid one controversy, but maybe accidentally sparked a smaller, more niche one.
You could say that. Although some publications, like the Mechanics magazine, again, were quite dismissive. They basically said the practical benefits of the new coins being lighter, cleaner, more convenient were way more important than, quote, pedantic quibblings about the second tie in Brit. They were focused on the function.
Right. And what were the practical specs of these new functional coins?
Okay, so the alloy was 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. The new penny weighed just about a third of an ounce, 0.333 ounces, or 9.45 grams, and was about 1.2 inches, or 30.8 millimeters, across.
And the key thing was the weight compared to the old ones.
Exactly. That weight, 9.45 grams, was precisely half the weight of the old standard copper penny it replaced.
Half the weight. That must have made a huge difference to people carrying change.
Oh, enormous. And the halfpenny and farthing were proportionately lighter, too. They used a specific standard for those. 40 pence worth of either halfpennies or farthings would weigh exactly 1 pound of avoirdupois. That's the standard weight system.
Okay.
This standard allowed them to make the coins as large in diameter as possible for easy handling, while still being much lighter than the old coppers. Our sources even give this neat practical measurement. Lay 10 pennies, or 12 halfpennies, or 15 farthings edge to edge, and they'd measure exactly 1 foot.
That's a great detail. Helps you picture them. What about the artistic reception beyond the Brit fuss? Were people happy with how they looked?
Reviews were pretty mixed, actually. The Morning Post apparently thought the Queen's likeness was only good on the halfpenny, not the others.
Huh.
The Globe newspaper felt that, artistically, the coins, quote, hardly came up to what might have been expected. Even the Mechanics magazine, while praising their practicality, wasn't keen on the depiction of Britannia.
So not universal acclaim, then?
No. Another expert, Sebastian Evans, speaking to the Numismatic Society, found Victoria's portrait questionable and the overall design feebler than earlier coinage. Though one thing the Mechanics magazine did praise was having the value 1 penny, etc., clearly stated on the reverse, finally ending the confusion between similar-sized worn coins.
That makes sense. But despite the mixed reviews, the public did give the penny a nickname, didn't they?
They did indeed. It quickly became known as the bun penny, apparently named after Queen Victoria's hairstyle in the portrait, which resembled a bun.
The bun penny, a name that stuck for decades. Okay, so they had the design, the metal, the specs, but actually producing millions upon millions of these must have been a massive job for the Royal Mint.
It was a huge challenge, yes. For one thing, large-scale bronze production was relatively new for them technically. They ran into initial problems like the coining dies breaking or wearing out much faster than expected.
Growing pains.
Exactly. But the bigger issue was just scale. The Royal Mint simply didn't have the capacity to produce the enormous number of new coins needed to replace all the old copper quickly and keep up with striking gold and silver coins at the same time.
So they couldn't do it all in-house.
No, not fast enough. So they had to contract out a significant amount of the production to private firms, specifically firms in Birmingham, which was, the heartland of Britain's metalworking industry.
Which firms?
James Watt & Co. got the first big contract, and later another Birmingham firm, Ralph Heaton & Sons, was also brought in.
Were these companies experienced in making coins?
Oh yes, very. They'd struck coins for other countries before, like France and Belgium. They knew what they were doing. But, naturally, they charged a premium for their services.
How much more?
The sources mention £4 and 10 shillings per ton more than it cost the mint to produce the coins themselves, which apparently translates to about £1,000 per ton in today's money. A significant extra cost for speed and scale.
Worth it to get the job done, presumably? How did they handle getting all these new coins distributed across the country?
Well, initially, to really encourage rapid adoption, the Royal Mint actually paid for the new coins to be shipped anywhere in the UK. Free delivery, essentially.
Yeah,
They stopped doing that by 1872, though, apparently because surpluses of the new coins started building up in some places.
Okay, so that's getting the new coins out. What about the other side of the equation, getting the old, horrible copper coins back?
That process kicked off in mid-1861. They used post office branches all over the country as collection points. People could take their old coppers there.
How quickly did the old coins disappear?
It varied. In the big cities and towns, the sources say the old copper vanished relatively quickly. But out in more rural country districts, it apparently took several years before they really disappeared from daily use.
Was there any incentive for people to actually bother handing in their old, worn, possibly defaced coppers?
Yes, there was, for a while. Until the end of 1869, the mint offered a 2% premium on the face value of any old copper coins turned in. Little bonus.
And after 1869?
After that, the premium stopped. And then the old copper coins were officially demonetized, meaning they stopped being legal tender within the UK from July 31st, 1873. That date was recommended by the Deputy Master of the Mint at the time, Charles William Fremantle.
So after July 1873, shops didn't have to accept them anymore.
Correct. Technically, applications to redeem them from country districts were refused after that date, although the sources suggest the mint did quietly continue to redeem them at face value for a bit longer if people sent them in.
What about the colonies? Britain had a huge empire then. Did they have the same deadline?
No, they got a longer transition period. The old copper wasn't demonetized overseas until the end of December 1877, but getting the coins back from all corners of the empire was obviously a slow and complicated process.
I bet. Any interesting stories emerge from that colonial redemption effort?
There's a really fascinating one mentioned concerning Malta in 1876. The mint received a shipment of old copper coins back from the crown agents for the colonies. That was the body handling financial stuff for many colonies.
Okay.
The shipment was worth about 256 seconds, but the request that came with it was remarkable. They wanted most of that value paid back in new bronze pennies and halfpennies. But a specific amount, 56 seconds and 5 shillings worth, they asked for it to be paid in newly minted third farthings.
Third farthings? I barely knew they existed. Were they still making those in the 1870s?
Only just. And primarily because they remained legal tender, specifically in Malta. The mint actually had to strike 162,000 new third farthings just to fulfill this one request from Malta.
Wow, that's incredible. A tiny coin struck decades after the main changeover, just for one colony's needs.
Exactly. It's a brilliant little illustration of how local currency requirements could still dictate production long after the big policy shift.
It's amazing detail. Do we have any overall figures on how much of the old copper was actually returned versus how much just vanished?
Yes, the sources give some numbers. About 580,000 pounds worth of old copper was officially withdrawn from circulation within the UK. Plus, another 44,000 pounds worth came back from overseas.
Okay.
But a really substantial amount, estimated at 656,376 pounds worth, was never officially redeemed. It just disappeared.
Over 650,000 pounds worth. That's a huge amount of missing money. Where did it all go? Any theories?
Well, the deputy master, Fremantle, he had a theory. He wrote about it. He believed that a large proportion of that unredeemed copper, especially the really early, heavy issues like Bolton's 1797 cartwheel penny,
Yeah.
was probably melted down privately by individuals or businesses simply for its scrap metal value.
People melting down their pocket change because the copper was worth more than the face value.
That was his strong suspicion. He figured this private melting probably accounted for the vast majority of the pre-1860 copper coins that never made it back to the mint for official redemption.
That really highlights how much intrinsic value was in those old, heavy coins, doesn't it, compared to just being tokens?
Yeah, absolutely does. It gives you a whole different perspective on what seems like just everyday currency back then.
So these new bronze coins, the bun penny, the half penny, the farthing, they arrived with all this drama and effort. How long did they actually last?
They proved to have remarkable staying power. Wyon's bun penny design, with his portrait of Victoria, was actually struck right up until 1895.
35 years.
Yeah. And his Britannia reverse design. That lasted even longer. With just some minor modifications over the years, it remained on the British penny right up until decimalization in February 1971.
Wow, over 100 years for that Britannia reverse.
Incredible, isn't it? The halfpenny and farthing reverses were changed earlier in 1937, but the coins themselves were still part of that same bronze series that began back in 1860.
So when were these bronze coins themselves finally taken out of circulation?
It happened gradually in the run-up to decimalization, or D-Day, in 1971. The little farthing went first. It stopped being legal tender right at the end of 1960.
Okay.
Then the halfpenny was withdrawn on July 31st, 1969. And finally, the bronze penny itself, the bun penny and its successors, was demonetized on August 31st, 1971, a few months after decimalization kicked in.
And yet, even though the coins were bronze for over a century, lots of people in Britain still colloquially call pennies and 2-pence pieces coppers, don't they?
Absolutely. That linguistic echo of the original metal persists long after bronze took over. It's a neat little cultural hangover from this whole historical transition.
So reflecting on this deep dive, we started with this picture of, frankly, awful coinage, heavy, worn, battered, confusing, even defaced copper coins. And we've journeyed through this huge process to replace them. Official surveys, high-level political decisions by figures like Gladstone, the engraver Wyon dealing with direct input from the Queen.
That surprisingly heated debate over Latin grammar with Brit versus Brit, bringing in private industry like James Watt & Co. for mass production, the huge logistical challenge of swapping the coins across the entire country, even reaching into the colonies.
Leading to these fascinating side stories like striking third farthings just for Malta, and the theory of people just melting down their old heavy pennies for scrap.
Yeah, it's quite something when you unpack it. The sheer depth of history, the layers of decision-making, the technical challenges, the human stories, all embedded in something as simple and everyday as the small change in your pocket.
It really is. Thinking about the Queen's direct involvement, Gladstone's focus on grammar, the sheer scale of it all, the longevity of Wyon's designs, and even that lingering nickname, copper. These are the kinds of surprising details and aha moments you get when you really dig into the source material like you've brought us today.
Absolutely. It makes these tangible objects of the past really come alive. You realize the size, the weight, the metal, the design of the coins you might handle today. None of it is accidental. It's all the result of specific historical moments, political choices, technical constraints, artistic debates, just like the ones we've talked about with the 1860s changeover.
It really makes you pause and think, doesn't it? If something as small and commonplace as a penny or a halfpenny contains all this history, all these hidden stories of political debates, royal interventions, logistical headaches, and surprising consequences, well, what other everyday objects that we interact with constantly are just packed with similar hidden histories waiting for their own deep dive?
That's a great question to ponder. What other stories are hiding in plain sight?